So I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today.
It was bizarre statements like that which caused former CIA Director John Brennan, who is an MSNBC national security analyst, to call the president's performance in Helsinki, quote, nothing short of treasonous. And the former CIA chief of Russian operations tweeted, from a counterintelligence perspective, something is going on behind the scenes. Before Helsinki, I was less sure. Post-Helsinki, I feel sick. And so today, in an opinion piece in the Washington Post, the issue is put front and center. Quote, based on the actions of the Trump administration this week, reasonable people can disagree over whether treason is being committed. Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution says that treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. The writer of that Washington Post piece joins me now. Daniel Drezner is a professor of international politics at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, along with MSNBC contributor Joyce Vance, a former U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Alabama. Welcome to both of you tonight. Daniel, let me start with you because you seem shocked that we've reached the point that you would even be writing those words about treason and the President of the United States. A year and a half ago, someone would have called that, as Rand Paul said, Trump derangement syndrome, and thinking that that was a far-out view. But now it's narrowing and narrowing down in terms of what the possibilities are.
Well, the question has always been, when we deal with Trump or when we deal with any president we disagree with and they do something that we find genuinely shocking, do you explain this through incompetence or do you explain this through malevolence? And, you know, I teach political science and I know how people generally work. And, you know, 9 times out of 10, I'll take the incompetence story. But the way that the Trump White House's behavior has been over the past 2 weeks in this European trip, either we're talking about radical incompetence, and I'm not ruling that out, to be clear, or we are talking about malevolence. Why does Trump want to have a meeting one-on-one with Putin with absolutely no note-takers? You know, why does he tweet out things that indicates that he actually prefers Vladimir Putin to the U.S. mainstream media, which he considers, frankly, you know, an enemy of his? It's almost a question of his revealed preferences, which is Trump prefers, you know, foreigners who like him to Americans who are loyal Americans but nonetheless disagree with him. And I find that incredibly disturbing. And as I said, you know, we talk about this. A common saying in Washington is the notion that reasonable people can disagree on something. And the very fact that reasonable people can disagree on whether or not we're talking about treason or high crimes and misdemeanors or what have you, I find genuinely shocking and seriously nauseating.
Joyce, you know, I read what the Constitution says about treason, and I don't know how one proves it, and particularly since we don't have a lot of information, we're all just puzzled as to why the president would be acting this way. But there's a broader concept that you talk about when it comes to treason. Maybe there isn't a legal bar that can be met, but in terms, as we've discussed, as Daniel has said, in terms of the reasons for this behavior, if we've decided it's not utter incompetence, because we know the president is supported by smart people, we know guys like Dan Coats are competent, experienced individuals, then we start looking for other explanations.
You know, we think about treason as being a betrayal of trust. I think that's what's at the core of this concept. But for federal prosecutors, you actually have to prove every specific element that's established in a statute to have a conviction. So that's difficult for treason, among other reasons, because you would have to prove that we were at war with a country, in a formal state of war with the country that the defendant allegedly provided aid to. That can't happen here. We're not at war with Russia. But this same set of facts that Daniel references could be used in the political context up on the Hill to form a basis for impeachment. And Congress could characterize it however they wanted to. So there's a real difference here between a legal criminal proceeding and what might happen in the political process.
Betrayal is a concept that can exist in Congress and can be bandied around. Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona alluded to that on the Senate floor today. Let's listen.
But what isn't a mystery is that by choosing to reject object reality in Helsinki, the president let down the free world by giving aid and comfort to an enemy of democracy. In so doing, he dimmed the light of freedom ever so slightly in our own country.
So, Daniel, that's interesting because Jeff Flake used the words that the Constitution uses with respect to treason, and he called Russia an enemy of democracy. But really, he said the thing that may be more important over the last 2 weeks in the president's behavior, both in Canada and in Great Britain and in Brussels and then in Helsinki, and that he has let down the free world. Bret Stephens of the New York Times was talking to me the other day, and he said, I don't know that Donald Trump believes in a free world. That's a different thing than proving treason, but it is definitely something we do not expect from the President of the United States.
The way I would put it is the following. You know, in international relations, if you're trying to figure out, you know, what are our core national interests, if we're trying to assess, you know, national security threats, we are in a situation now where, frankly, I think the biggest national security threat to the United States resides in the Oval Office in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Now, there may be, and I certainly take, you know, we'll defer to the legal question about the fact that there's a really high statutory bar to proving treason, but in some ways it almost doesn't matter whether the president is radically incompetent or just malevolent. The point is that he's managing to wreck the edifice of American foreign policy that has generally served our country's interests for the last 70 to 80 years. And he's not suggesting anything in its place except apparently him palling around with Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping or Kim Jong-un. Now, to be fair, again, you would want, you know, the president to have, you would want the United States to have reasonably productive relationships with other great powers, and you want, you know, you prefer negotiating with North Korea to many of the alternatives. But there's doing this well and there's doing this incompetently, and he's doing it incompetently.
Or something else. We'll have to see. Guys, thanks very much for joining me tonight, Daniel Drezner and Joyce Vance.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.